What's going on, Cloud Scholars? I hope your day is going well. My name is Kieran Truss, and I want to say a special welcome to all those if this is your first time at the page. And I also want to say welcome back to all the Cloud Scholars out there if you subscribe to the page and hopefully like the page. So listen, today's video is going to be about Azure Key Vaults, right? So we're going to do a whole series. This is going to be a 5-part series where I'm going to literally show you everything from provisioning a Key Vault to all the way to managing Key Vaults. So what exactly are you going to learn in this series? So part 1. We're going to as always, we have to do our introduction, but the introduction consists of defining what we're learning. So first, what is Azure Key Vaults? And then once we already define what Azure Key Vaults, we're going to talk about what are the different components of Azure Key Vaults. And then finally, I'm going to end that video off with talking to you about how to go about provisioning a Key Vault. So that's part 1. In part 2, I'm going to talk to you about how to manage your Key Vaults. So if you have one Key Vault, fine, pretty easy to manage. But what happens if you have 50, 100, or 200 Key Vaults? How do you go about managing all those different Key Vaults and doing it the right way? I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Azure policies with that one. Then in part 3, we're going to get into backup and replication. So you have these Key Vaults, you need to back them up. Make sure your data's safe. Whether it's your secrets, your keys, or your certificates, you need to make sure that all that stuff is kept in a safe place. Part 4, we're going to talk about network access. How do you go about managing your Key Vaults that this way only the right individuals have access to your Azure Key Vaults? Then part 5, we're going to go into using Azure Key Vaults with logic apps, right? So I'm going to show you exactly how you can go about doing that and integrating Azure Key Vaults, not with just that service, but with other service within the Microsoft ecosystem. So listen, I talked a lot. I want to get in front of the portal, get ready to show you a bunch of different things. Please make sure you got your water. You make sure you got to grab something to eat, something to snack on, because I'm going to show you a ton of different things, and I'm extremely excited to get this series going on with you. So listen, I want to say thank you so much for watching, and then let's get our sleeves rolled up and let's jump into the Azure portal. See you there.
Let's talk about what is Azure Key Vault. So Azure Key Vault is a cloud service for securing, storing, and accessing secrets. A secret is anything that you want to tightly control access to, such as an API key, passwords, certificates, or cryptographic keys. So what are the benefits of Azure Key Vault? One is centralization. Then there's access monitoring and login, increased security and control over keys and passwords, reduced latency with cloud scale and global redundancy, and only authorized identities have access to this information. So let's get a visualization of how keys work and why they're so important. So on the left-hand side, we have 2 Azure services, and it doesn't really matter. We're only using 2 for this specific scenario, but you can use it for many other Azure services as well. So we have virtual machines and a web app. Now, with these Azure services, there's information that you want to keep safe. And that information could be customer addresses, usernames, social security, passwords. You know, it depends on what you're utilizing your services for. And one of the things you want to do is make sure that you encrypt the data on those services. You know, but if that data is encrypted, you want to make sure that the only people who can decrypt it are the ones who have the keys. So let's talk a little bit about how keys are really set up. So when you set up a key initially, a key gets set up, and when your keys get set up, they really get set up with Azure Active Directory. So when you're setting up a keys, it's going to say, hey, which identities have access to this key vault? Who should have access to me? So think of a key as, you know, the guard in front of the building, or, you know, in front of your building, and you're like, okay, listen, you work here, you know, only allow these people with this badge to come in here, and that badge would be your key. And the people that have access, in this case, are different identities within your Azure environment, would be users, would be groups, or service principals. So as I said to you before, a key gets provisioned, a key vault gets provisioned. It first goes to Azure Active Directory and say, okay, who is allowed to retrieve my key? And Azure Active Directory says, okay, this user, this group, or this service principal. So that this way, whenever someone needs to get access to those Azure services, they need to be a part of that specific identity that was established when the key was first created. Now, I will say this, I don't want to make it sound like you can't modify that information within your key vaults. You can access your access policies. You can access if you're doing RBAC as well. All right, so let's jump to the Azure portal. I don't want to PowerPoint slide you to death. It's just I feel like PowerPoint kind of helps me with some visualization, but I'm actually going to jump back to the Azure portal like we're here right now, and let's go into key vaults and let's get a first key vault provisioned. So we're going to come up to the top portion right here. We're going to type in key vault. I already have mine popping up, but I just want to go ahead with you just in case you do not have yours popping up. And what we're going to do is click on create key vault. So once we're in create key vault, you know the usual subscription. You have to put your subscription in there. Let's see, do we have a key vault group? We can create a new resource group if we want to, or we can just throw it in RG East US, which is perfectly fine. And then the key vault name. So this needs to be unique. So we're gonna call it Cloud Scholars Keys. Will I get a ding? And look right here, if you notice it's green, so that says okay, that name is perfectly fine. So then we have region, we're going to keep it in East US. And then when it comes to price and tiers, we have two options. We have standard and premium. So standard is what we're going to go with. It definitely is going to help us out with what we need for us. But this premium, it literally gives you more information. Not information, but it gives you a little bit more security, and it has stuff for HSM. So that really is for anybody if you need to follow any kind of compliance regulations where you need to have this HSM keys, then you would go with that one. But for us, we're fine with standard. So as we continue going through this, we're going to see down here where it says soft delete. So it's enabled by default, and then it says days to retain deleted vaults. Now, if you're wondering to yourself, okay, how long should I keep my data for those vaults and keep those retained? I will definitely speak to compliance and find out exactly what they say you need to adhere to in terms of making sure that you're compliant with it. Or you can just, you want to make sure that you're applying that initiative, right? Whether it's NIST 853 or any ISO compliance or any HIPAA compliance, you want to make sure that you apply that to your, whether it's your complete subscription or even if you're applying that initiative to a resource group. But for us right now, we're going to stay with 90 days. And then down here, you have purge protection. So basically, this says enabling purge protection on a key vault is an irreversible action. Once a purge protection property has been set to true, it cannot be changed. So we can keep it as disabled. Purge protection, allow key vaults and objects to be purged during the retention period. It's talking about this right here. Or it says enable purge protection, enforcing a mandatory retention period of deleted vaults and vault objects. We're going to leave ours as disabled for now. And then we're going to go to next. So over here we have access configurations. So we have two types of vault access policies and Azure role-based control. So let's talk a little bit about those permission models and what's the difference. So we have vault access policies. This determines whether a given security principal, namely a user, application, or user group, can perform different operations on keys, secrets, and certificates. And then we have Azure role-based control. Provides fine-grained access management of Azure resources to grant access at a specific scope level by assigning appropriate Azure roles. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, hey, well, which one makes more sense? And honestly, it really depends on you and the organization. Now, for me, I'd rather go with Azure role-based control, where we can now go through PIM and do things like that. But for some cases, it might make sense to say, okay, let me go with the vault access policies. Now, when it comes to the vault access policies, you see down here, my name is already populated. So if I was to say, let me create, and I could say, hey, I can go from a template, keys, secrets, and certificate management. There's all this different stuff that I can go ahead and do. And then I could come over here and I could say, okay, you know what? Let me go to next. And I can say, okay, principal. Only one principal can be assigned per access policy. And I can go in and say, okay, which principal do I want to give access to? And this is really the user. So this is a group right here. I have another group over here as well. I have a bunch of different names. I can go in and say, okay, let me see. I think I have a test user. Let's see what pops up. I have test user 1, and I can say, okay, let me give test user 1 the application access to this. And I can say application optional if I want to give an application authorization to use the keys. And I could just click on next, and I could click create. And there you have another access policy where I have another user who has access to this. For now, what I'll do is I'll just come over here and I'll click delete, and then I'll delete that person. I'll just leave myself for now. Now, one of the things I want to point out when it comes to Vault access policies is this. A key consideration is Key Vault supports up to 1024 access policy entries, with each entry granting a distinct set of permissions to a particular security principal. Because of this limitation, we recommend assigning access policies to groups of users where possible rather than individual users. Using groups makes it much easier to manage those permissions for multiple people in your organization. So what that's referring to is over down here where we have our access policies. As you see right here, I have my name here, but instead I should really come up here. I could go create, and then I can add a group. So this way that 1024 would now drop down to 1023, and then I would still have more entries. So you get a limited amount of entries that you can really manage within access policies. So it's best to keep it within the group, because then you can just easily say, okay, let me take this person out of the group and not have to make modifications to everybody else. So I hope that makes sense. So then next, we can go to networking. So over here at networking, we have, we can enable public access. You can change this or configure another connectivity method after this resource is created. So let's say we're like, okay, we're going to enable public access, and we're like, hold up, you know what? We shouldn't have done that. Let's disable public access. You can go ahead and do that as well. Then we have public access information right here. We could say all networks, or we could say selected networks. So we could go ahead and go to selected networks, and we could choose which virtual private networks that we want to give access to, those subnets. But for now, we can just say, well, let me go down here. Let me see, add an existing network. Let's see what populates here. And it gives us an option that says which virtual network, and I can go down to West US, and then it's going to give me my subnets, so I can choose which ones if I want to just isolate it to specific VPCs. I'm going to go and click cancel out of that because I don't want to go ahead with that. I'll just leave it as all networks for this. And then we have the option of private endpoints. So you have your private endpoints, which provide private connection to that resource. That's a more secure way of going about doing things. But for this video, we're just going to leave it as just pretty much the enable public networks and then all networks. So then we click on next. Next we have tags. We're not going to put any tags in here. I never really do for any of these videos. And then when I go to next, it's just going to give me the whole review and create and make sure that I did everything correctly. Okay, so that is done. So let me go and click create. Deployment in progress. Shouldn't take too long. All right, so our resource has been completed. We have our Cloud Scholars keys, and if you notice, this is the main section that we're really concentrating here when it comes to Key Vaults. Is you have your keys, your secrets, and your certificates. As mentioned to you in the definition when I was defining about Key Vaults, these are the three items that you're managing, and you want to make sure you keep protected. And then you have your access configurations, your network, and all other stuff. So we're going to definitely do a deeper dive in this series where I'll talk about a bunch of different things right here. We're talking about backups and how to do that with Key Vaults. Going to talk a little bit about more about access policies and role-based authentication with your Key Vaults, and a couple more different things as well. But one of the things I want to do before I end off this first part with the intro into Key Vault series is I want to talk a little bit about best practices when you're creating your Key Vaults. So one of the things that we can go through with the best practices, and what I'll do is I'll leave a link in the description of the video just talking about what Microsoft recommends for the best practices. But I have some information here just to let you know exactly, really about how you want to go about with creating Key Vaults. So one is use separate Key Vaults. So you want to use your separate Key Vaults for different applications. So if you're given an application or you're giving a user access to your Key Vault, you want to make sure that Key Vault is specific for that one, because you don't want to just intertwine different applications with sharing the same Key Vault, because that could kind of cause a mess right there, and you can see exactly where that goes. You want to also make sure you control access to your Key Vault. You want to turn on data protection for your Key Vault. You want to turn on login for your Key Vault. You want to make sure you say, okay, who is accessing this Key Vault? And then finally, you want to make sure you're doing your backups for your Key Vault. Now, I know you have that purge protection in at 90 days, but you could take it a little further with backing up your Key Vaults as well. So that is pretty much it. This is a what is and how to video combined about Azure Key Vaults. This is the intro into Azure Key Vaults here at Cloud Scholars. I hope the information I provided you was beneficial and really helped you out. Please continue to watch this series because I have a lot more information, a lot of things to get through and provide you later on in this series. So as always, as of right now, when you're watching this series and you continue watching, just try to take a break, get something to eat, something to drink, and then come back to part 2. But until then, I want to say thank you for watching the videos. If you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe here at Cloud Scholars. Our goal is to get you from scholar to consultant and from consultant to expert. Thank you, and see you next time.